Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Resistance Live. It's the 14th of November, 2025, and everything is disgusting is kind of the theme of today's show. I've just spent another 2 hours doing a deep dive into the Epstein documents that were released yesterday by House Oversight from the Epstein estate. And this morning, I decided to start searching through them just simply using the F word because I was really curious what that would bring up. And what it uncovered was an entire swath of emails between Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein. And when I tell you that when you string these emails together, you see a global network of influence and crime. I mean, that's probably the biggest understatement I'm going to make on this broadcast for the next 12 months. It's truly unbelievable. And the thing that one of the big takeaways that, I'm sort of taking from all of this on my second day in reviewing these files is that there are such significant ways in which Epstein was controlling levers of power behind the scenes, all of which led back to Trump. And that in and of itself is a huge part of this story that goes even further beyond the sex trafficking, the rape, the victimization, and into the fact that everybody knew that Epstein was doing this. There are jokes inside these emails between Bannon and Epstein about Epstein being a child rapist, literally in that language. And at the same time, what Epstein was being paid for in most instances was not financial advice. Again, I said this morning on Blue Sky, but it's worth repeating this. This idea that Epstein was a financier is a lie. It's a cover. What he was being paid for was connecting the most powerful white men on the planet to one another to control the levers of power. Again, somebody this morning came at me and was like, oh no, he was blackmailing people. And I have to tell you guys, from looking at these emails in the depth that I have looked at them now for 2 days straight, that nobody is being pressured. Nobody is being said, it's being told, I have photographs of you with a teenage girl, you better pay me. It feels much more like, everybody knew what was happening. It was the least well-kept secret among this group of incredibly uber wealthy white men. And what they wanted from Epstein was access to these teenage girls and connections. And in and of itself, this is one other thing I have to kind of put out there. It really doesn't feel like anybody was involuntarily doing anything in relation to Epstein. It feels like everyone knew exactly what was going on, and there was an understanding that Epstein was doing what he was doing, and everybody was okay with it, if not participating. So one of the things that, I just want to mention here is that there needs to be, I think it's a much easier, more acceptable line in some way for those of us who are survivors and even those of us who are not, to think that somehow Epstein manipulated these men into giving them his money. I think it's a much more difficult thing to grasp that thousands of white men worldwide were willing to give Epstein their money in exchange for the access to teenage girls and to power that he provided. I have to tell you, the whole thing looks voluntary to me, just entirely voluntary. And that in and of itself is disturbing because it does mean, as I said yesterday, that, quite not all that different from what QAnon was alleging, there's a cabal of incredibly powerful, super wealthy white men all over the world running things while simultaneously raping and trafficking teenage girls. It's a lot. It's a lot. So I just want to go through like a couple of the big takeaways from these emails with Bannon, because, you know, I got to tell you guys, like, I'm not done. What I have been through now are a series of emails that originated about 4 months before Epstein was arrested in 2019. And then a whole series of emails going all the way back to like Trump's first election. Okay. And there's more, you know, there's a lot more. Like, he and Bannon were texting with each other sometimes 100 times a day. And one of the things that folks should be aware of is that Epstein was coaching Bannon, giving him PR advice, giving him messaging advice, telling him what to wear, how to set up his camera shots on CNN, reviewing his performances on Anderson Cooper and CNBC to advise Bannon on how to mobilize Trump's base. Talking about things like, we have to make China the enemy because all the deplorables can get behind that. Talking about how to unify people across racial and ethnic divides to get behind Trump by claiming that, like, you know, everybody who's a citizen of the United States is in this together. There's a lot of xenophobia and racism in these texts. Don't get me wrong. It's crazy, like how casually the racism just drips out. The anti-Black racism, the Islamophobia, the sexism, the misogyny, the like constant berating of women. It's nonstop, okay? Like nonstop in these text messages. But Bannon comes across, I was thinking about this as I was like getting ready to get on the broadcast. Bannon comes across in a lot of these emails as actually being like deeply insecure, as though he is really, you know, he wants very much to be in control of like global politics. And simultaneously, he's very afraid about how he looks on camera, very afraid about the things that he's going to say or has said and how it's coming across. And Epstein is behind the scenes saying, like, focus on this. This is your message. This is how you defend yourself as a racist. This is how you defend yourself from accusations of being a misogynist. This is how you go out there and tell the base what they need to get behind. Ooh, here's a great review of how you did in your broadcast from the Vatican. Minute by minute by minute, Epstein is controlling behind the scenes what Bannon is putting out there. And that is something that I did not expect to see in this at all. Also, by the way, just in case people were wondering, Bannon stayed at Epstein's house in Paris less than 4 months before Epstein was arrested in 2019. There are jokes in there about Epstein being Bannon's assistant, booking so much private jet travel that he was the most expensive travel agent ever retained, and how there were no massages included in the services that he was providing to Steve Bannon. It's a lot. Like, it's a lot. And that's on top of the fact that then there's like the two of them going back and forth about Epstein being with MBS at the Louvre 4 months before Jamal Khashoggi's murder, about Epstein and Bannon celebrating, at least that's how the texts read, when Jamal Khashoggi was murdered by MBS. There are discussions about Epstein meeting with people deep in Emmanuel Macron's government, introducing Steve Bannon to the president of Mongolia, working behind the scenes to advise Trump. This is something else that you all should know about. Just a few months, again, before Epstein was arrested again in 2019, he knew that Trump was down on Pence. And there are a series of emails where Bannon is hearing for the first time from Jeffrey Epstein that Trump wanted to replace Pence with Pompeo because he considered Pence to be disloyal. So this idea that, you know, somehow Trump and Epstein had a falling out in 2014 or 2011, the dates have been, you know, bandied about over Virginia Giuffre being kidnapped out of Mar-a-Lago, is the biggest load of horseshit that we have ever been fed from Donald Trump, and that's saying a lot. What it appears from these emails is that Trump and Epstein were in contact as recently as a few months before Epstein was arrested. Because if Epstein knows that Trump has soured on Pence and is looking to replace him with Pompeo, and also knows, by the way, that Trump told Mark Kelly to fire Jared, and then Jared told Mark Kelly he was fired, that information is coming from straight inside the White House. So Trump and Epstein were never separate. I mean, that's very clear from what's contained in these emails. I would argue like it's basically fact. because there's information in these texts and in these emails that Epstein would never have known if he had not talked to Trump himself. So that's another side of this. But, all of this collaboration behind the scenes, again, we've got Epstein coordinating, introducing Bannon to all sorts of right-wing figures all over the world. It's Bannon and Epstein talking about, the rise of a far right-wing leader in Italy, how to connect that person to Orban, how to connect that person to Shinzo Abe, how to make sure that Bolsonaro, how to make sure this global fascist populist movement will rise, right? With Epstein cracking jokes about Bannon being the next Hitler. That's literally what is contained in these texts. And it's a lot. I just have to point out, it's a lot. What it is leading me to is a conclusion, not just, and I said this yesterday, I've said this many times, and I'm sure I will say it many times again, is that what is contained in the DOJ Epstein files does in fact implicate the president, but it probably implicates the president in much more than just child rape and sex trafficking. What it probably implicates the president in is all this stuff that Bannon and Epstein were working on behind the scenes. And I am particularly interested, by the way, because Epstein was under surveillance. There are discussions inside these texts and emails about Bannon trying to set up meetings with Epstein into the middle of 2019, when they knew, and in 2018 as well, when they knew that Epstein's front door in New York was under constant surveillance by the feds. And so, I have real questions about who was coming and going. I'm certain they had taps on Epstein's phones. Who was recorded on those messages? What did the FBI have on the conversations between Trump and Epstein and Bannon? Because, by the way, there were conversations that you can see in the text they had by phone, in addition to the ones that they were having by text and email. Then on top of it, you have Epstein trying to set Bannon up with Obama's former White House general counsel, who happened to be one of Epstein's friends, who now works for Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs came out yesterday and said they were standing by her, even though she has all these texts with Jeffrey Epstein. It's crazy. There are conversations in these texts about Epstein telling Rumler, the White House general counsel under Obama, that he thought that Trump should pardon everybody involved in the Russiagate scandal after the Mueller report came out, and then fake a heart attack so that he could get off scot-free. There's clear indications, by the way, that Epstein was talking to the Russians while talking to Bannon, and that there were back-end communications going on there. There's references to oligarchs. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And so when you put these two things together, you put Bannon with his enormous social media presence, his enormous far right-wing, neo-Nazi, Christian fascist platforms, together with Jeffrey Epstein, who is connected to literally every powerful white man in the world, not to mention had a lot of connections with the Saudi kingdom, with the Abu Dhabi, with the Chinese, with Bolsonaro, with Shinzo Abe, right? You put all of this together and you have a very clear roadmap. Now, this is one thing I will just say about this. I want the people who organize these databases to put them in a chronological order, because as a trial lawyer, the stories as they develop would be much easier to string together if everything was in chronological order. But it puts together a story of an effort behind the scenes for Bannon and his allies, with the help of Jeffrey Epstein, creating essentially a global populist movement that puts only far-right figures into power. This is all astonishing when you read the details of it. And also, one of the things that I just have to point out about this is that Jeffrey Epstein also doesn't appear to be terribly smart, constantly making jokes like he's a 12-year-old boy. There are records in his email of all these kind of sexist and racist jokes. And simultaneously, you have Steve Bannon, who, is held up as this kind of primary messenger of the far right, being insecure about how he appears on camera on CNN. It's wild, just absolutely wild. Now, I want to say one thing, because, I've tried really hard in the 9 years almost that I've been doing this to come on here and not be a conspiracy theorist. You all know this is a conspiracy theory free zone. I just want to make something really clear, because I know talking about this, if you haven't read the emails, a lot of this could sound really crazy. you can go to my Blue Sky and you can go through all the posts that I've done this morning and yesterday, and you can see the actual evidence that I'm referring to in this. You can actually read the emails. You can look at the connections that were being built across global governments behind the scenes by Steve Bannon with Epstein's help. So I want everybody to kind of get this. This is not conspiracy theory. These are facts from the very actors themselves who were involved in it, speaking to one another in what they thought were private communications. And I will just say this, okay? I don't see any way at this point that the next step of this is not the release of the DOJ Epstein files. Now, let's talk about that for a second, because there's been some movement on that since yesterday. As we discussed yesterday, the discharge petition has passed now with the 218 votes, now that Grijalva has been sworn in. And Mike Johnson said that he would then bring it to a vote faster than the 7-day ripening period that is ordinarily required for a discharge petition for a random House member to bring something to the vote around the control of the House, the Speaker of the House. Okay, so there's going to be a vote on this sooner than expected. We are starting to see real cracks in the GOP. Yet just yesterday, I mean, and this like blew me away. One of our least favorite Southern gentleman senators said that he thought that there was no way that the American public was going to be satisfied with anything less than the full release of the DOJ files. And that is somebody who is like routinely aligned with Trump, cracked a joke about how Trump would probably put out a meme, just like he did with Hakeem Jeffries, of that particular senator with a sombrero on his head, but he didn't care because the American public deserves to know. Okay, let me just say something. If you have a far right-wing white Southern senator saying that in anticipation of the passage of the Epstein Files Act through the House, then coming to the Senate, there are greater rifts under the surface with the GOP than what we already know about. Now, I want to go through this from the perspective of, again, of the procedures for this, because this is a bill. Okay, I want to make this really clear. It's a bill, you know, Schoolhouse Rock with me. Okay, I'm just a bill and I'm only a bill and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. It's a bill. It has to go through the process of being approved in the House, approved in the Senate, sent to Trump's desk for signature, where he will doubtless veto it. So the question now, as I said yesterday, is can we get to a veto-proof majority? That's 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate. There are indications right now that more than 100 Republicans may vote in favor of this when it comes to the floor of the House. Okay? That, by the way, will probably get us to a veto-proof majority. Then we've got the Senate. And the Senate is where the real pressure has to come because of the filibuster. All right? Because reminder, to overcome the filibuster, you need a 2/3 vote. And to overcome a veto of Donald Trump, you also need a 2/3 vote. So as I said yesterday, there is a need for everyone right now. It wasn't Lindsey Graham. It was Kennedy. There's a need right now for everyone to call your senators and demand the release of the Epstein files. You should also call your reps. I said this yesterday, but like this is your homework today. Call your reps and senators and demand the release of the Epstein files. Because I will tell you right now, the Bannon-Epstein connections are revolting enough. What is contained in these documents is terrifying enough. I have questions. I was putting on my makeup to come on the air, and I have really serious questions, like good faith questions, based on what I saw in these emails about whether or not the murder of Jamal Khashoggi was engineered behind the scenes by Epstein and Bannon. Like, I have huge questions about that. There's information in here that actually looks like they could have been a part of it. So I just want to make this really clear, okay? What we have seen so far is just the tip of the iceberg. We know the DOJ has photographs and videotapes, but beyond that, they have what's been produced to them through subpoenas for documents, what's been produced to them subject to warrants that were issued for surveillance. Like, these are all things that we need to know, that we deserve to know. We deserve to know whether or not the president was actually engaged in raping children, yes, but we also deserve to know, like, what was going on behind the scenes here between Epstein and Trump, between Epstein, Trump, and Bannon, between Epstein, Trump, and Bannon, and everyone in Trump's inner circle. between all of those people and these international far right wing figures. So again, I like the way that this is going to go down has everything to do with how the American public responds to it. And so I just want to implore all of you to please make your phone calls today. Call your representative, even and especially if they're MAGA. Call your senators, even and especially if they're MAGA. Demand the release of the Epstein files. It must be done. Like, it must be done. Okay. Couple people are asking me, like, what does this mean in terms of prosecution? Well, that's a huge question, and I did answer it yesterday, but I'll just give you the short version here. As long as Pam Bondi is in charge of the DOJ, nobody's going to be prosecuted for this. But there are huge developing events in Europe surrounding Epstein, Bannon, and what they were up to, okay? Because Epstein, as many of you know, had a house in Paris. As I already said, Bannon stayed at that house in 2019, a few months before Epstein was arrested. One of the things that that everybody should be aware of is that a lot of these international meetings, a lot of these like conspiracies were birthed overseas, okay? And if international figures are involved in them, that leads to jurisdiction by The Hague. Now, Jeffrey Epstein is dead, okay? So Jeffrey Epstein is not going to be brought before The Hague. Whether or not other international figures who are implicated in this could be is a very big question, okay? And, you know, I just have to say that I have no idea how this is all going to play out. You know, they're like, one of Macron's advisors for culture had Jeffrey Epstein and Steve Bannon at his house in 2019. I don't know what for. Like, they had meetings, right? There are meetings with international figures like all over the world, Rome, Paris, in Italy, other places in Italy, across, like overseas, in Brazil, right? Like Bannon was all over the place spewing this stuff at the time. So, you know, again, we have just tremendous things to come, I think, on this. And we have no idea where the direction is going to end. And I just have to say one thing to the person in the comments who is saying that Epstein was Trump's Navalny. No. Navalny was a freedom fighter for democracy who was murdered by Vladimir Putin. Epstein was a child rapist who was engaged in trying to overthrow international governments behind the scenes with Steve Bannon. Please don't smear Navalny's name with an association like that. Like, that's pretty disgusting. Okay. So in any event, I think we have to be thoughtful, okay, about how we talk about this, and also reasonable about the expectations, because the associations that are coming to light here behind the scenes raise very serious questions about leverage and control and illegality. And, you know, even for somebody like me, right, who practiced, you know, a lot internationally, right? I had cases involving environmental crimes and human rights violations when I was practicing that had me traveling all over the world very similarly. I can't predict how this is going to come out. I can't predict how this is going to play. I can tell you, though, that I think that Steve Bannon, as recently as a few months before Epstein was arrested, was very deep in criminal conduct with Jeffrey Epstein. Like, very deep, very deep. And, you know, the questions now are, where is this going to end? And some of that, again, has to do with the pressure that we put on our elected officials. So it's a lot. I mean, it's just a lot. And I know that these last two broadcasts today, the last couple of days, you guys have felt like a fire hose. That's the experience of going through these emails. It's literally like, you know, you drop the F word into the search bar like I did this morning at 8:30 a.m. And it is email upon email upon email upon email of horrific conduct, crimes, conspiracies, negotiations with foreign figures, influence via the media, like connections to artists and geneticists, because he was obsessed with like eugenics, right? Connections to academics who were advocating for far right-wing policies, connections to lawyers internationally, all of these meetings all over the world. It's just unbelievable, like absolutely unbelievable. And yet it's true, which makes it worse. Okay. A couple other issues that we have to touch upon today related to the budget bill and everything else having to deal with it. Okay, somebody asked a question about like, what do we do with our representatives who will not call for Schumer's removal? Well, you know, Indivisible, as we've talked about here, have already started a campaign on this. And there is going to be more about this as we head into the 2026 midterms because of the sellout of Americans on healthcare. Part of the pressure campaign by Indivisible is designed to get those people up for re-election in the Senate to call for new leadership at the top of the Democratic Party in that body. And so we have a long way to go from here and there, from here to there. And, you know, the best way to get involved in that is to actually get involved in Indivisible's work on that front. They have a box for that campaign on their homepage at indivisible.org. Please go there, read what it is about, because it's really about primary season. And you know, follow up and get involved. That's the best way to do that. All right. Similarly, I was asked about this clause in the budget bill that allows the 8 representatives who were investigated after January 6th to be compensated using taxpayer dollars for having their phones investigated as potentially being insurrectionists. Yes, it is obscene. We don't know if it's going to make it, like, you know, I mean, it's like it's now passed the House and the Senate. So presumably there will be something there is something actually in the final bill that was signed by Trump that allows it. But whether or not it will survive a court challenge, because that could be coming, is yet to be seen. All right. And I will just say one thing to the person who is saying that Schumer might have been playing 5D chess. I discussed the fact that that is absolutely not true on yesterday's broadcast, and you can go back and watch it. So I don't know what's going to happen with the payoff to these 8 far right-wing representatives, okay? Whether or not that money actually gets paid out is a question, but it is in there. Yes, it's horrifying. Jeffries is really mad about it. Okay, I have one other note here. Yes, that's actually what I just talked about. Okay, and then one last thing, which was a really good question, actually, from some fellow survivors. You all know I am a survivor of CSA. I've been very public about this. And, you know, you also know that I did human rights litigation that involved really serious allegations of, like, there's no way to put it, sex trafficking and crimes against humanity. Somebody asked a question as a survivor of, like, how to tolerate what we're learning from the Epstein files. And you know, I want to just like say a couple of words about that, because there are places where you do need to be cautious about this. Like, I want to just mention to everybody, I know that there are these images circulating on the internet that claim to be of Trump and like a pile of blonde teenage girls on private jets. Many of those images are AI generated. Like, I want people to remember here that not everything that you see on the internet is real. Okay. So some of this stuff is being designed by bad actors or people who wish that they had evidence like that and thrown out on the internet for clicks and follows. All right. So first and foremost, I really do want people to be thoughtful about what you see and asking yourself if you know that it's real. Okay. I have seen some very big names posting images that I know are AI generated, because if you backtrack them through Google Images, you find the original image and it's not Trump. So I want people to be very mindful about that first and foremost. Second of all, you know, my advice to survivors is like, you've got to take breaks right now. You do not need to be in the middle of this. I am choosing to be in the middle of this, but please keep in mind that I was trained as a lawyer and then practiced law as a trial lawyer for 15 years in human rights cases and financial fraud cases. And I have like a training and a depth of experience that allows me to hold the container for this that most people don't. All right. Like, and, you know, that's on top of like, you know, decades and decades of therapy and various practices and medication and other things that have allowed me to kind of like heal and recover in a way that lets me process this. That said, I still got physically ill at the end of last night. Like, I had a really bad stomach ache that I couldn't kick. And I went to bed at 8 o'clock, and that's trauma. Right? Like, that's my physical response to bearing witness to this with my enormous bandwidth that has been cultivated by experience, training, and work. All right. So I do want people to be mindful that you are not under any obligation, whether you are a survivor or not, to immerse yourself in this material in the way that I am choosing to do so, or the way that like the media is doing right now. And if you find yourself in a place where there is, you know, a physical response happening in your body to the effect that like you're not feeling well, you should absolutely close your phone, put it down, stick it in a drawer, walk away from the computer and take a break for as long as you need to. I mean, like, That's the best advice I can give. And I will also just tell you this. You do not have to read the things that I am posting. If you don't want to watch the broadcast on a day where I'm talking about Epstein, I'm totally cool with that. Okay. Everybody needs to do the things that they need to do right now to stay sane through all of this. All right. And particularly, it's really important for survivors to rely on our support networks as all of this comes out, because the fact that there was a global group of incredibly wealthy white men either complicit in an enormous worldwide sex trafficking ring that victimized 1,000 teenage girls at least, or were actually participating in those crimes themselves, like, would trigger anybody. It would trigger anybody. It's like, it's horrible, right? Like, it's unfathomable in many senses. It's like hard sometimes even reading these documents to really believe what you're reading, because the scope of this is so big. So please take care of yourselves. Like, that's really my best advice. Just like, take care of yourselves, take breaks. Don't read it if it's going to be triggering. God knows I've had to do that many times with other forms of news. So I'm going to continue working through this stuff today as much as I can. I am, again, parsing through this using skills that I had over 15 years as a trial lawyer. So I know how to search these documents in particular ways too, with like Boolean search terms and legal strategy to try to find the things that are the most important. And I will continue doing that and posting it on Blue Sky, and you can follow it there if you would care to. But I really want people to take very good care of themselves right now in all of this, because it's a lot to hold and it's a lot to comprehend, and it would fry your brain. It fries your brain, frankly, to see the reality of this. Yeah, so that's that. There will be a bonus broadcast today for all our Patreon subscribers. If you want to join us, you can get 20% off an annual subscription right now using the code FALL2025. That broadcast will be at 3 p.m. today, and chances are very solid that I will also be talking about new things I found in the Epstein files then. So if you want to get in on that, please become a subscriber. Also, I decided this morning to take like 2 hours away from my regular job, which, by the way, includes things that I was supposed to be doing, like editing next week's educational video in conjunction with our video editor in LA. I opted out of that. So if you want to kick me a tip, I'm actually just going to do this for all the work that I'm doing. Here is my Venmo, which is Elizabeth-Cronise McLaughlin, all one word. Or you can cash at me at EC McLaughlin if you want to kick me a tip for all the hard work, because it did take time away from my day job and it's going to take more today. And I will catch everybody else on the bonus broadcast today at 3 p.m. Please subscribe to this channel, give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends and family if you think they'd find it interesting or helpful. And I will catch you all back here last week. By the way, for the person mentioning Me Too, there is an enormous discussion between Bannon and Epstein in these documents on an off and on basis over years about men that they knew and were friends with being brought down by Me Too. So, like, keep in mind, Epstein was really good friends with Harvey Weinstein, really good friends with Brett Ratner, had Johnny Depp and Marilyn Manson on an agenda for an event he was planning. So just be aware. All right, my friends, I will catch you all back here next week live. I will see our subscribers today at 3 p.m. And thanks everybody for your support. All right, bye. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.